Iran thought it had a good strategy. As US bombs dropped and blockades were put in place, Iran would launch drones and missiles at a key American base in Saudi Arabia to whittle away at its defenses. The Pentagon just found a solution to that problem. It has secretly deployed an impenetrable shield that makes Iran's drones powerless, and best of all, that shield comes courtesy of Ukraine. Iran has no answer for this, as Ukraine just upgraded US air defense to God-tier mode. On April 22nd, Reuters broke the news that 5 separate though unnamed sources had confirmed that the Pentagon has unleashed an air defense system of Ukrainian design at the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. The decision was made in the aftermath of Iranian attacks that destroyed buildings and aircraft, in addition to resulting in 1 casualty on the US side. The new system is known as Skymap, and it's something that Ukraine has been using to coordinate its air defense against the very Shahed-type drones that Iran is now using to hurt American bases. This system is incredibly innovative, a command and control platform that will allow the Pentagon to coordinate its anti-drone defenses all over its base. We'll be coming back to what the system does later, but the real problem that Iran now faces is that a strategy that it believed to be foolproof has just blown up in its face. The Iranian regime thought it had it all figured out. Cheap drones sent by the dozens would create plenty of problems for the US in the bases that it has developed all over the Middle East. Those problems were twofold. There's the direct damage, of course. A Shahed that strikes its target brings with it an explosive warhead that can rip away assets that the US is relying upon to conduct Operation Epic Fury. However, there's also the cost involved in defending against Iran's drone attacks to consider. Shaheds are cheap. TRT World says they cost around $35,000 per unit for Iran to build, and some sources say they can be made even cheaper than that. The types of interceptor missiles that the US has been using to counter them aren't, as they can easily cost upwards of $1 million each. Even if Iran doesn't score direct hits with its Shaheds, it can drain the Pentagon of war funds just by sending them to US bases. The Prince Sultan Air Base has been a consistent target since Operation Epic Fury was launched. In fact, Euromaidan press reports that the repeated attacks against this particular base are what triggered the Pentagon to accelerate its adoption of Ukraine's tech in the first place. Iran's attacks against Prince Sultan have done far more damage than the US would have liked to see. On March 27th, Iran unleashed a missile and drone attack against the base that resulted in a US Air Force E-3 Sentry airborne warning and control system airframe being damaged, alongside several other aerial platforms, such as aerial refueling tankers. The March attack also injured at least 10 US service members, 2 of whom suffered serious wounds. This was a clever move by Iran. E-3 Sentry aircraft are used by the US for battlefield management, intelligence gathering, and surveillance of the types of targets that the US has been hitting during Operation Epic Fury. Take out the sentries, and the US loses eyes in the sky. Iran's March 27th strike against the Prince Sultan base came on the back of an earlier attack on March 13th that saw Iran hit a quintet of US Air Force refueling planes. Again, this was an intelligent move. The US needs its aerial tankers in the sky to keep its fighter jets and bombers airborne and firing for as long as possible. It's no coincidence that these types of airframes were targeted in Iran's second attack on Prince Sultan. The March 13th strike also showed Iran that the base didn't have the level of air defenses that it needed to defend itself against the combined barrages of missiles and drones that Iran had been unleashing. At least, that used to be the case. It's not anymore. The US didn't take long to identify that some had vulnerabilities at its Saudi base. If it hadn't known before, it did when Iran's missiles and drones crashed down on airframes that cost tens of millions of dollars to build. Patching up the holes quickly became a priority, and the US Department of Defense took action. On April 6th, the Department of Defense announced that the Joint Interagency Task Force 401 had committed more than $600 million to a program designed to strengthen America's ability to counter the many threats posed by unmanned aerial vehicles. Of that $600 million, $350 million had already been committed during the first month of Operation Epic Fury, which is right around the time that Iran's attacks were tearing through the Prince Sultan base. The rest of the money is going toward domestic drone defenses. But the question has to be asked, did the US spend some of the $350 million it has dedicated to Operation Epic Fury to bring Ukraine into the fold? If it did, neither the US nor Ukraine is letting on. The development of Skymap is still meant to be a secret, which is why Reuters hasn't been able to secure any official confirmation beyond the word of 5 unnamed sources that it says are close to the Pentagon. We can assume that part of the $350 million the Department of Defense spent has gone toward Ukraine. What we know for certain is that Skymap will go a huge way towards solving a maths problem on top of helping the US to defend its Saudi base against Iranian drones. And the maths is very simple on this one. Using multi-million-dollar plus interceptor missiles to take out Shahed drones that cost around $35,000 and can cost as little as $20,000 doesn't add up. A $1 million answer to a $20,000 question doesn't stack up, as Fortune puts it, and it's easy to see why. Let's say Iran launches a dozen drones at Prince Sultan. Cost to Iran, assuming a $35,000 outlay for each Shahed, $420,000. Cost to the US at $1 million per interceptor, $12 million. This is attrition by bleeding a military bank account dry. And the great irony is that the nation that the US has drafted in to help it in Prince Sultan is a country that has been using these same types of mathematics against Russia. Ukraine's battlefield experience combines with its ability to churn out new technologies at a record pace, which has allowed it to develop cost-effective systems to counter Russian attacks. Putin is using Shahed drones too. He got them from Iran, and Russia is now building clones of these drones internally. Ukraine has worked on creating all sorts of responses to these drones, and has come up with interceptor drones that cost as little as $1,000 per unit. Suddenly, the Shaheds aren't looking like such a great investment. Ukraine has also made an entire war defense out of its ability to use cheap, medium and long-range drones to target Russian assets, from air defense systems up to oil refineries, in attacks that cause millions of dollars of damage in return for investments of a few $100,000. Iran is just following the asymmetric blueprint that Ukraine has used for 4 years. Who better than Ukraine to help the US counter that blueprint? That seems to be the conclusion that the Pentagon has reached at the Prince Sultan Air Base, which has led to the deployment of Skymap. But what exactly is Skymap? And what does its deployment mean, not only for the US in Operation Epic Fury, but also for Ukraine? Before we answer both of these questions, you are watching The Military Show. We bring you the full picture, not just the headlines. If you want to see more of this type of insight, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Skymap isn't a new type of drone or some other basic weapon that Ukraine is providing to the US. It's much bigger than that. For several years, Skymap has been the command and control platform that Ukraine's military has used to counter Russia's aerial threat. The company behind the platform, Sky Fortress, was formed in 2022 by Ukrainian engineers who had links to the country's military, which means they were perfectly placed to develop a system that served the very specific needs that Ukraine had. No anticipation of what that system would have to do was needed. Ukraine had a problem with Russian drones and missiles. Skymap was tailored to solve that problem. Today, Skymap is a massive system that operates Ukraine-wide. It pulls inputs from acoustic sensors, radars, and even live video feeds shot by Ukraine's own drones into a single integrated digital interface that allows the user to develop a real-time picture of the aerial battlefield. The sheer volume of data that Skymap receives is key to enabling Ukraine to rapidly react to any airstrike that Russia attempts. Not only that, but Skymap also identifies the incoming projectiles. That's key for resource management. Ukraine doesn't want to waste air defense missiles on Shahed drones when those expensive drones are better used against Russia's ballistic missile threat. It also doesn't want to be sending out cheap interceptor drones to tackle an incoming missile. With Skymap, Ukraine can identify the incoming threat and quickly choose how to manage that threat. Think of Skymap as a central node through which air defenses of entire bases and cities can operate. What started as a network of around 10,000 acoustic sensors placed all over Ukraine has evolved into a much broader system due, in part, to support from Ukraine's Brave One innovation platform. For the US, this kind of platform is invaluable. Not that America didn't have its own command and control system set up at Prince Sultan. As Reuters points out, the US already had the Forward Area Air Defense, or FAD, platform in place. Developed by Northrop Grumman in the 1990s, that platform tracks incoming threats too. However, its age might give us a clue as to why the Pentagon sought an upgrade. Though a FAD system can detect drones, it was designed during an era when mortars and rockets were the biggest threat that the US bases would face. That's simply not the case anymore. The Shahed drones are a much larger problem, and the US needed a system that was tailor-made to help it counter these specific types of drones. That's Skymap in a nutshell. And Ukraine is doing much more than sending its command and control system to Prince Sultan Air Base. According to First Post, Ukraine has sent a team of experts to the base, which is roughly 640 kilometers or about 400 miles away from Iran. That team has the clear mission of helping the US counteract a drone issue that has cost America $1.3 billion in material damages, on top of the millions of dollars spent on interceptor missiles to defend against Iran's aerial attacks. Ukraine's experts are reportedly working with US personnel as we speak, helping them with the operation and integration of the Skymap system. Don't underestimate how important this little detail is for Ukraine. What we're seeing here is a transfer of knowledge from one nation to another that can be used to build a foundation of cooperation that will benefit Ukraine for years to come. This is no one-way relationship. This is where things are starting to shift for Ukraine, as it's morphing from a nation that once relied on the US and others to keep it going into a country that can hold its own and even help its allies with their defense. Before we dig deeper into that point, First Post reveals that Ukraine has already set up a training program for US personnel at Prince Sultan Air Base. Through that program, American personnel not only learn how Skymap works, but also benefit from over 4 years of Ukrainian experience in dealing with the very types of threats that Iran is unleashing. Ukraine is delivering a battlefield-tested and extremely well-honed anti-drone system. The US didn't have anything like that before. Now it does, and this is likely a system that can be integrated into other technologies that the US has deployed at Prince Sultan. You may remember that we mentioned cheap interceptor drones as one of Ukraine's most important solutions to the Shahed problem. That might lead you to assume that Ukraine's experts have headed over to Prince Sultan with these types of drones in tow. That may well be the case. We know that Saudi Arabia is one of the Gulf states with which Ukraine has signed a decade-long defense deal that includes drone technology. However, nothing of this sort has been confirmed by the US. Plus, Prince Sultan is a US base on Saudi territory, so it may not be included as part of the deal between Ukraine and Saudi Arabia. However, the US may believe that it doesn't need Ukraine's interceptor drones. Back in September 2025, the news broke that the US had invested over $5 billion in purchasing Coyote interceptor drones from Raytheon. The contract for these drones, which is scheduled to run until September 28, 2033, will result in the US getting thousands of its own interceptors. Right now, United 24 Media says that America produces about 100 of its interceptor drones per month, so we can assume that production capacity will be expanded to hit 40,000 or so units that will come as part of this deal. A single Coyote drone costs the US an estimated $125,000. So these aren't perfect drones for dealing with Iran's Shahed threat, at least on a cost basis, but they are capable of dealing with both aerial and marine drones, so it seems likely that the US will be integrating its Coyotes, which are among several other air defense assets that America is testing right now with Skymap. But those are future hurdles for the US to overcome. Right now, it's working with a Ukrainian-made command and control system that it knows will work because Ukraine has been using it against the very type of threat that Iran poses to bases like Prince Sultan. The impenetrable shield is being raised, and that is important for far more reasons than the US simply getting its hands on a system that helps it to defend its bases against Iranian drones. For Ukraine, the implementation of Skymap as a US base is a huge move that proves the country offers plenty of value to the US defense sector. What Ukraine has done here is step up to fill a gap in the US air defense structure, and it's doing it using a technology that the US hasn't developed itself. Do you remember the hundreds of millions of dollars that the Department of Defense is investing in its anti-drone programs? Ukraine would love to get itself a slice of that pie, along with any other investments that the US makes into drone technology. Assets like Skymap could provide a route for Ukraine to take to get its hands on cash or weapons that it can use in its defense of its territory against Russia. A "you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours" situation is developing here. Skymap is at the heart of it. Beyond the monetary benefits this deal could offer to Ukraine, there's the strategic aspect to consider. It's fair to say that the relationship between the US and Ukraine has been rocky over the last year or so. Clashes with the Trump administration have often left Ukraine on the edge when it comes to just how much it can rely on the US for support in Ukraine's fight against Russia. Keeping the US on board is as much about Ukraine proving that it can be useful to America whenever the time comes that the US needs support, as it is about the US simply stepping up to support Ukraine. Again, backs need to be scratched, and that's what we're starting to see in the Gulf. This is Ukraine's drone diplomacy at work. And it's strengthening the relationship between Ukraine and the US at the perfect time for Ukraine. FDD Action points out that Ukraine has been one of the very few US allies that have jumped at the opportunity to step up and help America practically from the moment that Operation Epic Fury was launched. Interceptor drones, experts, and now Skymap have all been sent over quickly, and that has led to Ukraine proving itself to be one of the most valuable and reliable allies that the US has. Congress should take note of this, FDD Action argues. Ukraine is offering this insane level of support even though it has been drained by over 4 years of war with Russia. Is there a strategy for doing this? Of course. Ukraine knows that stepping up when the US needs help is good for its relationship with America. But Ukraine knowing exactly what it's doing when it provides technologies like Skymap doesn't discount the fact that it's proving itself to be a model ally to the US. We're also starting to see signs that the integration of Ukrainian technologies is starting to run deeper than many might have thought. An interesting piece of news broke on March 31st. Defense One reported that now-retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg had joined the board of a company named Powerus. That news seems irrelevant at first, but then you learn that Powerus is a Florida-based company that has been created to acquire technology from and build relationships with Ukrainian drone manufacturers. Kellogg, who advised Trump during his first term and was elected as the special envoy to Russia and Ukraine back in November 2024, could provide Ukraine's drone manufacturers with a direct link to the White House. This is often how relationships between two countries are strengthened, not by grand gestures but by moves happening behind the scenes that build entire networks of relationships. So the arrival of Skymap is massive in the Gulf region and for Operation Epic Fury, but it's also part of a much broader plan that Ukraine has put in place to make itself an indispensable partner to the US. We're seeing direct examples of Ukraine helping the US to achieve its goals in Iran. We're also seeing Ukraine deploy drone experts to European countries, which feeds into the unshackling of European defenses from the US the Trump administration seems to desire. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is actively pushing for multi-year drone deals with the US. Skymap is on a seek and destroy mission for Iranian Shaheds in Prince Sultan Air Base, but Ukraine itself is on a seek and strengthen mission for every relationship that it shares with its allies. We are now seeing Ukraine develop into a major player in the Gulf region, and that isn't solely by virtue of providing equipment to the US. Deals are being struck with Gulf nations that could end up seeing Ukraine play a key role in the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Find out what that role could be and what it will mean for Ukraine in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you're subscribed to The Military Show so you can catch all of our updates on the latest developments in Operation Epic Fury. And thank you as always for watching.